June 6, 1944. American soldiers waded through water that had turned crimson, their boots heavy, their rifles raised, their hearts pounding against the thunder of German machine guns. On Omaha Beach, young men from Ohio and Texas and Brooklyn fell into the surf, never to rise again. Meanwhile, British paratroopers descended through the pre-dawn darkness over Normandy, seizing bridges before the enemy even knew they had arrived. The largest amphibious invasion in human history was unfolding across 50 miles of French coastline. And Adolf Hitler was asleep. His staff officers paced the halls of the Berghof, terrified. Reports were flooding in. Allied forces were storming the beaches. Thousands of ships dotted the English Channel. But no one dared wake the Führer, not without absolute certainty of what was happening. When Hitler finally rose that afternoon, when his adjutants finally delivered the news that the Allies had landed in Normandy, he studied the reports. He examined the maps. And then he said something that would doom the entire German defense of France. He said, this wasn't the real invasion. The real attack, he insisted with absolute certainty, would come at Pas-de-Calais, just 21 miles across the narrowest point of the English Channel. And across that channel, in the fields of Kent and Sussex, sat the reason for his certainty. Row after row of Sherman tanks gleaming in the morning sun. Tanks that would never move, because they were made of rubber. Landing craft that would never touch water, because they were plywood and canvas. An entire army that existed only in Hitler's imagination. This was Operation Fortitude, the most successful military deception in human history. And the Führer had swallowed it completely. The Phantom Army had been growing since the winter of 1943. In the fields of southeastern England, closest to France, the Allies constructed something extraordinary. They called it the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, and they gave it a commander whose very name sent chills down the spine of every German officer who had faced him. George S. Patton. The Germans knew Patton intimately. They had studied his tactics. They had felt the sting of his aggression in North Africa. Allied intelligence discovered through intercepted communications that German commanders considered Patton the single most dangerous general in the Allied arsenal. And that knowledge became a weapon. If Patton commanded an army group in southeastern England, the Germans would believe with absolute certainty that the invasion would strike Calais. Because surely, the Allies would never waste their most fearsome commander on a mere diversion. So Patton, burning with frustration at being sidelined from the actual invasion planning, played his role. He appeared at bases throughout Kent. He delivered fiery speeches to divisions that didn't exist. He was photographed inspecting tanks that British engineers had inflated like enormous balloons, complete with painted details and fake tread marks pressed into the mud beneath them. From the air, from the distance, German reconnaissance planes were permitted to approach before being chased away. Everything looked perfect. But the physical deception, the rubber tanks and wooden aircraft, that was only part of it. The true artistry was invisible. Radio operators sat in tents scattered across southeastern England, transmitting messages between units that existed only on paper. They created the electronic signature of a massive army preparing for war. Supply requests, weather reports, movement orders, administrative traffic, the constant chatter of 11 divisions getting ready to cross the channel. German listening posts intercepted every transmission. Their analysts plotted each unit's supposed location. They tracked phantom strength figures. They built a detailed picture of an invasion force aimed directly at Calais. And the double agents sold it all. Every German spy operating in Britain had been caught. Every single one. But instead of executing them, British intelligence made them an offer. Work for us, or face the consequences. The most brilliant of these turned agents was a Spaniard named Juan Pujol Garcia. The British code-named him Garbo, after the actress, because of his extraordinary talent for performance. The Germans trusted Garbo completely. They paid him handsomely. They awarded him the Iron Cross. And every single report he sent confirmed exactly what Hitler wanted to believe. A massive force was gathering in southeastern England. And when the invasion came, it would strike at Calais. The logic seemed unassailable. Calais offered the shortest crossing, just 21 miles of water. It provided the quickest route to Germany's industrial heartland. It put Allied forces within striking distance of the V-weapon launch sites that were already raining terror on London. Any rational military commander would choose Calais. Hitler knew this. His generals knew this. So when Allied intelligence fed them evidence of a massive army gathering opposite Calais, it confirmed what their own strategic analysis told them must be true. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, positioned his forces accordingly. He placed the 15th Army, 19 full divisions, along the Calais coast. They dug trenches. They fortified bunkers. They waited for Patton. Meanwhile, the 7th Army defended Normandy with far fewer divisions, stretched thin across a much longer coastline. It was a calculated gamble, based on what German intelligence assured them was absolute certainty. Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, commanding Army Group B, wasn't entirely convinced. He had fought the Allies before. He understood their capacity for misdirection. He argued passionately for more forces in Normandy, for permission to position panzer divisions closer to the beaches where they could counterattack immediately if needed. But Hitler, confident in his intelligence services, certain of his own strategic brilliance, refused. The panzers would stay in reserve, ready to move wherever the real invasion materialized. And the real invasion, Hitler was absolutely certain, would come at Calais. The Allies knew exactly what Hitler believed, because they were reading his mail. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park, working around the clock in absolute secrecy, had cracked the German Enigma encryption. They could read Wehrmacht communications almost in real time. They could see Hitler's troop dispositions. They could monitor his strategic assessments. They knew the deception was working, so they kept building it. They kept feeding it. They made Fusag more real in German minds than some of the actual units preparing to land on the beaches of Normandy. When D-Day finally came, when the pre-dawn hours of June 6th erupted with paratroopers floating down through the darkness and naval guns pounding the Norman coast, the German response was chaos. Commanders couldn't reach Hitler. Rommel was in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. Rundstedt requested permission to move the panzer reserves toward Normandy. The answer came back from Hitler's headquarters: wait. This might be a diversion. When the Führer finally awoke, when he finally studied his maps and read the intelligence reports, his response was immediate. Patton was still in England. Fusag hadn't moved. The attack in Normandy, while significant, was smaller than the force intelligence said was massed at Calais. His conclusion came with absolute certainty. The Allies were trying to draw German reserves to Normandy. Once he weakened Calais, the real invasion would strike. He had seen through their deception. He ordered the 15th Army to hold position. 19 divisions, nearly 200,000 men, sat motionless, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Across the Channel, Allied commanders watched German movements through their intelligence intercepts. They saw 19 divisions sitting idle at Calais. They saw the slow, grudging release of reserves toward Normandy. They saw their deception working beyond their wildest hopes. And they kept feeding it. On June 9th, 3 days after the landings, Garbo transmitted an urgent message to his German handlers. Fusag was preparing to move. He provided detailed information about units loading onto transport ships. He warned that the main invasion was imminent. The message reached German intelligence at 3 in the morning. They woke Hitler immediately. He read the report, and his conviction hardened into absolute certainty. He had been right all along. Normandy was merely a feint. He ordered the 15th Army to remain in position and prepare for the real assault. Days became weeks. Allied forces in Normandy pushed inland. They linked the 5 landing beaches into a continuous front. They captured Corentin. They drove toward Cherbourg. The beachhead grew stronger with every passing hour. And still, Hitler kept 19 divisions waiting at Calais. His generals began to question, carefully at first, then with increasing urgency. Rundstedt studied his maps and saw the Normandy beachhead solidifying into an unbreakable position. He saw Allied forces building up faster than German reinforcements could possibly match. He saw the window for crushing the invasion closing permanently. He requested, then demanded, the release of the 15th Army. Hitler refused. The intelligence was clear. Fusag remained in England. Patton hadn't moved. When he did, that would be the true invasion. Rommel, racing between his headquarters and the front lines, watching his forces ground down by relentless Allied air attacks and devastating naval gunfire, begged for reinforcements. He needed the panzer divisions held in reserve. He needed the infantry sitting idle at Calais. He was told to hold on. The main invasion was still coming. But doubt was beginning to creep in. German reconnaissance flights over southeastern England, the few that managed to penetrate Allied fighter screens, brought back photographs. Analysts studied them carefully. The tanks were there. The landing craft were there. But something felt wrong. The activity level seemed far too low for an army preparing to invade. Some officers began to wonder aloud. Hitler dismissed their concerns. He had predicted the Allies would attempt to deceive him, and he had seen through their tricks. Normandy was the deception. Calais was the true target. He would not be fooled into weakening Calais defenses. June became July. The Americans captured Cherbourg, giving the Allies a major port. The British pushed toward Caen. The hedgerow country of Normandy became a grinding battle of attrition. But the Allies were winning that battle. They were building up forces faster than the Germans could possibly match. And still, the 15th Army sat at Calais, waiting for Patton. Then, the intelligence reports began to shift. Agents reported fusag units moving, but not toward embarkation points. Moving west. Moving toward Normandy. Reconnaissance confirmed it. American divisions that had been identified as part of fusag were suddenly appearing in Normandy. Patton himself was reported visiting units at the front. The elaborate construction of the deception began to unravel. But it unraveled slowly. Each piece of contradictory evidence dismissed or explained away. Patton was simply inspecting troops before returning to his real command. The divisions were being temporarily repositioned. Fusag was merely reorganizing before the Calais invasion. German intelligence, having invested everything in the reality of fusag, having staked their credibility on its existence, found reasons to keep believing. Hitler found reasons too. He needed to believe. Because if fusag wasn't real, if Normandy had been the main invasion all along, then he had made a catastrophic error. He had kept 19 divisions idle while the Allies established an unbreakable foothold in France. He had given them all the time they needed to build overwhelming force. The strategic consequences were unthinkable. So he kept believing in Calais. He kept believing in fusag. He kept the 15th Army in position. Even as evidence accumulated that Normandy was the real fight, his staff began to push back. Officers who had been reluctant to contradict the Führer found courage in desperation. They presented intelligence reports. They showed him reconnaissance photographs. They displayed the order of battle in Normandy, the growing strength of Allied forces, the identification of units that were supposed to be part of fusag. They argued that every day the 15th Army remained at Calais was another day the Allies grew stronger. Hitler listened. He studied the reports, and he searched for reasons to doubt them. Perhaps the Allies had created fake unit insignia. Perhaps they had moved a few divisions to make him believe fusag was dissolving. Perhaps this was merely another layer of their deception. He had been right before. He could be right again. But the evidence kept mounting. By mid-July, 6 full weeks after D-Day, the truth was becoming impossible to deny. Patton had taken command of the Third Army in Normandy. Not fusag. The Third Army. A real army fighting real battles. Units that German intelligence had tracked as part of fusag were confirmed in combat in France. The radio traffic from southeastern England had gone silent. Aerial reconnaissance showed the fields emptying. The Phantom Army was dissolving because it had never truly existed. The moment Hitler finally accepted the truth, the exact words he spoke, no transcript survives to tell us. The realization came gradually, reluctantly, in painful pieces. A grudging acknowledgement here. A change in orders there. Permission finally granted to move divisions from Calais. But even then, not all of them. Even then, holding some back, just in case. What history documents is the devastating effect. In late July, the 15th Army finally began moving south. Too late. The Allies had broken out of the hedgerow country. Patton's Third Army, the real one, was racing through the gap. The sweep across France that would reach the German border by autumn had begun. The divisions from Calais arrived piecemeal. They were fed into a battle already lost. They could form no coherent defense. Hitler blamed his intelligence services for misleading him. He blamed his generals for not seeing through the deception. He blamed everyone, except himself. In meetings, he raged about Allied trickery, about the impossibility of distinguishing truth from lies, about the sophistication of enemy deception. But he never quite acknowledged that he had been fooled. The narrative became that circumstances had changed, that new intelligence had revealed new realities. His generals knew the truth. Rundstedt, who had argued for weeks to release the 15th Army, watched the divisions finally move south and calculated the terrible cost of delay. If those 19 divisions had counterattacked in the first week after D-Day, when the Allied beachhead was most vulnerable, the invasion might have been crushed. If they had arrived in the second week, they might have contained it. By the time they finally came, in late July and August, they could only slow the inevitable. The officers who created Fusag, who built a phantom army from nothing but imagination and made it real enough to paralyze 19 German divisions, achieved something remarkable. They proved that in war, perception can be as powerful as reality. What an enemy believes you possess matters as much as what you actually possess. The right deception, properly constructed, properly maintained, can be worth more than actual divisions of soldiers. They also proved something profound about Hitler. His certainty was his greatest weakness. His unshakable faith in his own judgment made him vulnerable to anything that confirmed that judgment. Showing him what he expected to see was more effective than any attempt to hide the truth. The Phantom Army succeeded because it told Hitler exactly what he wanted to believe. And once he was convinced he was right, no amount of contradictory evidence could shake his certainty. Not until the weight of reality became absolutely impossible to deny. By then, the Allies were racing across France. The Ghost Army had accomplished its mission. The real armies were winning the real war. And Hitler was left with knowledge he would never quite admit. He had been defeated by inflatable tanks and radio operators and a Spanish double agent he had trusted completely. The invasion he had been certain would strike at Calais never came. The army he had been certain was gathering in southeastern England never existed. The commander he feared most had been waiting in Normandy all along. Everything Hitler had been certain of was wrong. And by the time he finally accepted that truth, France was already lost. What Hitler said when he learned the full scope of the deception matters far less than what he had said before. His insistence that Normandy was merely a diversion. His certainty that Calais was the true target. His absolute refusal to release the 15th Army. Those statements, made with complete confidence, repeated despite mounting evidence to the contrary, defended long past the point where any reasonable doubt should have emerged. Those were the statements that mattered. They lost France. They lost the war in the West. They gave the Allies the foothold they needed to drive into the heart of Germany. All because one man believed absolutely. In an army that never existed, commanded by a general who was somewhere else entirely, preparing for an invasion that was never coming. The Ghost Army's greatest victory wasn't the tanks it pretended to have. It wasn't the divisions it claimed to command. It was the unshakable certainty it created in Hitler's mind. That certainty, more than any real army, more than any actual battle, shaped the outcome of D-Day and everything that followed. And when the truth finally became undeniable, when the phantom dissolved and reality became clear, Hitler said nothing worth recording. Because what could he possibly say? That he had been fooled? That his judgment had failed? That the Allies had simply outthought him? None of those admissions would ever come. Instead, there was only silence, and blame, and the slow, painful adjustment to a reality he had refused to see, until it was far too late to matter. The Ghost Army won its war without firing a single shot, and Adolf Hitler lost his, without ever truly admitting he had been beaten.